Hey, everybody. Welcome to part two of my discussion with Dr. Nadia Sabeh, Dr. Greenhouse, as she's known to everybody in the CEA industry. And we had just a great conversation. We had a lot to talk about, as we tend to, her and I. And so we split it into two episodes. This is the second episode, the second half of our conversation, and I hope you all enjoy it. Your opinion, like talking about like that, like we want to build the perfect grow room, like how do we do it and how come nobody's done it yet? Like back to the original sort of topic of like, like we 15 years ago we're all reading Dickinson's book and getting all excited after grad school and running out there to save the world with, growing plants and buildings. And there's no perfect yet. Why not? Like
Right.
what, or not why not, but what do we do? How do we figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few reasons. One is that is individualism. People want to do things their own way, and there seems to be a real resistance in standardization. So I think that's one, right? Because that's really what we're talking about is standardizing a grow room to be perfect, to create the perfect conditions for a particular crop. So I think that's one reason. The second is that there are a lot of crops and there's a lot of new crops that have entered the market. When it comes to tomatoes and cucumbers and our more traditional horticultural crops, maybe it has been figured out, right? I mean, there's a very large network of greenhouse tomato growers all over the world, and they have figured out what is the right diff. They have figured out what is the target average daily temperature, right? They have figured out what is the right ppfd. They've figured out a lot of things, but they've had a lot of time to figure it out. 30 years ago, tomatoes grown in a greenhouse tasted like crap. They called them water bombs, right? So there's also genetics and breeding
Yeah.
that went into producing a good greenhouse tomato. But there's a lot of standardization that has developed over 30 years. When it comes to lettuce or spinach or leafy greens or even cannabis, these are fairly new horticultural crops that we're trying to grow in mass indoors and in greenhouses. And unfortunately, the tendency in our world at large right now is intellectual property and ownership. And again, that individualism where people are trying to figure things out on their own and not share their wins and losses with the larger community to raise the ship all together. I think if we could break through that resistance, then we could get to the perfect grow room, the perfect greenhouse for all these different crops much quicker. The other thing is that, again, if you think about, say, tomato greenhouses, I'm just going to stick with tomatoes because it's pretty traditional vegetable horticulture crop, is that we have, right, we have the Netherlands and Europe that and then there's Spain, right? Two very different climates, but there's a concentration of these greenhouses where people have learned how to grow that crop within their climate and are sort of doing it together. There are competitive edges, of course, and different size growers, but same with right Canada and Mexico. In the US, we have all kinds of different climates, and a lot of people see that as a weakness that we don't have central hubs like Canada has, say, Leamington, for example, or Delta. And so that's a weakness. We don't have central hub or hubs in the US, not yet anyway. But I also see that as a potential strength if we could be more united as a country, even around greenhouse production. And that when you look at Europe, Spain supplies, right, the majority of vine crops to Europe in the winter. because it's warm and there's a lot of sun. And then in the summer, those greenhouse growers in Spain, they shut down. Guess what? They sterilize their greenhouse and the ground and the media and all of their systems. There's a downtime because now Northern Europe has a shitload of light, right? In the summer, it's the temperatures are good, right? The climate's good, and so now they supply the produce to Europe. You guys, we have that in the US within our country borders. We don't need a European Union. We already have a union of states. We could grow, right, vegetables. We could grow certain crops in the southern states in the Sun Belt in the winter, and then we could grow other ones in the north in the summer and supply each other, even along sort of similar distribution corridors, I would say. Right? It doesn't all have to happen in California. It doesn't all have to be imported from Mexico in the winter and Canada in the summer. Why aren't we doing it within our own borders? And I realize with cannabis, we are limited by federal regulations and interstate laws. Um, in California, we could almost do that, right? We're a long enough state. And so I would hope that the cannabis industry thinks about that as federal regulation loosens and hopefully interstate commerce is opened up to the industry that, hey, we have some really good growers in the Sun Belt and we have some really strong growers in the North and in the Midwest. Could we actually cooperate together? We used to have these cannabis cooperatives, right? Like within states and within communities. Could we create one community within our borders of the country and cooperate to supply each other during seasons, during times of the year where it will benefit everyone. And we don't have to, be sort of sequestered to our one state or our one locality. So anyway, back to your original question, why haven't we figured out the perfect grow room or the perfect facility? I think it's because we don't share enough knowledge. We have a lot of different crops, we have a lot of different climates, and everyone just wants to figure out their best nut. And the other thing I'll say is, I have visited so many different facilities, and you made a comment about, it's really easy to add under canopy lighting to a facility that was originally high pressure sodium. And when I walk in, there are so many facilities out there, right, that inherited or bought out an old greenhouse that was growing peppers or growing cut flowers in California, for example. But there's also a lot of indoor facilities that were originally distribution warehouses, garlic storage facilities. I don't even know. Like, there's just like so many random buildings out there that we've repurposed, which is amazing, by the way, because they're not just abandoned buildings anymore. But this idea of trying to create a standard room design is really hard when you are limited by the dimensions and the structure that you have available to you, right? I mean, it's great if you have a warehouse that's 20 feet tall, but there's other buildings where it's only 10 feet or 8 feet to the ceiling, right? And you're trying to carve up rooms, and because of where the columns are positioned or the posts or your neighbor or whatever, you are limited to building out three rooms, one that's 10 feet by 50 feet long, another that's 20 feet by 30 feet, and another one that's like 40 by 40. How do you create a standard room when you don't have a standard building?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the biggest challenges, right?
Yeah.
You have to, with any of these design build projects, you have to meet the building where it's at,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and what's the structural load of the roof is oftentimes my first question. What's
Yep.
the infrastructure, existing infrastructure, the power, what all those sorts of limitations. Where do the posts fall in the building, right? There's
Yep.
always that. My biggest pet peeve is posts in the middle of the room, so I'm always trying to
Mhm.
design around the posts, right?
Right.
Um, So, you know, one of the things that I'm curious about, right, is like I'm really curious about, and it's about this like idea of sharing. And when I first started studying commercial scale controlled environment ag, it was really greenhouse operators that I could go and talk to. And it was people from Cornell, the professors and the people running research stuff there. And it was people, I was in central New York. And so, in like the Delhi region, in those areas, there are other colleges that have pretty robust ag programs. And most of them had greenhouses and things like that. And they were all open to talking to me. And even just the people running
Hmm.
greenhouses like for profit, as their business, we're open to, yeah, stop by and we'll hang out, and you can see what we do here and we'll explain it.
Yeah, land
And
grant universities have extension programs specifically
yeah,
to
yeah,
work directly with farmers.
sure, yeah, Cornell has
Yeah.
an extension program, or is it Michigan has an extension program
Yeah.
that's done a lot. I actually, the first lighting course that I ever took was through them. And you know when it comes to that sharing, right, I'm curious, what can traditional horty growers learn from cannabis?
Mm.
What can cannabis learn from the traditional growers? And I will say, I haven't run into this in a while, although I haven't been to one of these trade shows in a while. But there was a period of time when I was at a couple of trade shows that were non-cannabis kind of CEA shows, and there was always sort of that awkward time at the cocktail hour the night before or whatever, when people are standing around a little group and they're talking about their tomato farm in Florida and they're talking about their peppers or whatever and wherever, and they'd get to me and it's like, oh, what do you do, and I was like, I tell them what I do, and it was kind of that like, there
Yep.
was a little bit of that like from the Horty folks, right?
Yeah.
That they were kind of like, oh, cannabis, yeah, like you're not real almost,
Right.
like you're playing house kind of thing. And it's like, no, we're deploying millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of capital against really sophisticated CEA facilities
Mm.
that, if built right, they rock, and they're really cool. And we're doing some cool stuff, and we're growing a high value crop that's very, while it is robust and will handle some F ups, it is also quite sensitive at times, and can really turn on you, right?
Yeah.
And really punish you by getting sick. So,
Mm.
what can we learn? What is like the things we could be sharing, or experiences in that?
The first thought that comes to my mind of what can traditional horticulture learn from cannabis culture, horticulture, is love for the plant that they're growing. Probably my favorite thing about working with cannabis growers is that they really love and respect the plant that they're growing. And many of them had maybe almost an existential experience with cannabis at some point in their life that led them to want to give back to the plant because the plant gave to them. And I just think that's beautiful. And so there is a nurturing that cannabis growers have for their crop, for their ladies, for their girls, right? And so they really want to nurture them and get the most out of them. Um, and I think that's wonderful. And with so much venture capital and private equity that has gone into traditional horticulture, especially in that vertical farming, high tech, ag tech space, there's not that same admiration for the plants that they're growing. They just see the plants as a means to an end. And this isn't all growers, right? But, and this is sort of a generalization, but I just think that if they could get back to the plant, if they could spend time with the plant rather than asking robots to automate all the interfacing with the plant and actually touched them, scouted, walked through these rooms and spent time with the plant, that maybe that would be a path towards more success in that side of the horticulture industry. Um, so that's what I see in that direction. With cannabis, when I first started working with cannabis about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, um, it was very, I'll say, bro culture. A lot of growers, again, I'm in Northern California, so there is a certain culture here where growers, where there's that respect and admiration and love for the plant. There is also almost like this magical quality that growers kind of put to the plant, and that cannabis is so special and so different from traditional horticulture. We can't do things the same way as we can growing tomatoes or lettuce or whatever. And so there was a big resistance from a lot of growers to learn from traditional horticulture because cannabis is this magical plant. Uh, and so I've seen that resistance break down. I've seen much more openness to looking at traditional horticulture, attending the short courses and workshops that are being put on by University of Arizona, Ohio State, Michigan, Dr. Greenhouse workshops, etc., to learn from the experts in traditional horticulture. So I've been happy to see that barrier break down. Um, but I think also cannabis growers could learn more from traditional horticulture. Be less scared of a greenhouse, right? Be more open to nutrient mixing tanks, right? As opposed to buying magic potions of nutrients. Nothing against my fertilizer friends out there, but right. I mean,
Yeah.
grow tomatoes and peppers in
Yeah.
like hundreds of hectares. They can't afford to buy gallons and millions of gallons of pre-mixed fertilizer. They buy the raw fertilizer components and then mix it with the water that they have there. Like, I would like to see that implemented more in cannabis. Um, so that's just one example. Um, yeah, I'll just leave it
Yeah.
at that.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot, well, there's a bunch of different questions there, but the one thing you touched on was the idea of culture. So
Mm.
I've never had, a conversation with a tomato grower, just to stay on the tomatoes, where they're like, yeah, the guy down the road, his tomatoes are crap because he doesn't abide by tomato culture. I've definitely had conversations on the campus side where it's like, well, their weeds crap because of culture, right? There's a lot of talk about
Oh,
culture.
right.
And there's a lot of talk of culture, especially like if you frequent the LinkedIn and that sort of spaces, right? You see culture, culture, culture thrown around as a terminology that I think is, at least in the CEA space, somewhat unique to the cannabis industry. You mentioned love for the plants. I would wholeheartedly agree that that is part of what people, I think, are talking about when they talk about culture.
Hmm.
Um, the attention and care, and the care about the end product, right? And the
Yeah.
intimacy with which growers and people who maybe consider themselves of the culture in cannabis would give to the process and the handling of the final products and the growing of the plants. But there's also this aspect of culture that's like, well, if you weren't dealing weed in 93, man, then you're not of the culture, right? If you
Right.
you weren't arrested, you're not of the culture. If
Yes.
and it's
Yes.
like, what aspect does that play? I think that's an interesting take on things. In my experience in the olden days when I was a younger feller and I was involved in such things, I knew a lot of people that weren't nice.
Mm,
Like just because we were selling weed didn't make you a nice guy. Like nobody was doing it because of like, helping out glaucoma patients in all fairness, right? Like
right.
that wasn't it, right? And so I just think it's interesting that that piece gets dragged in to like somehow then say that's indicative of quality or that's indicative of right like love of the plant, care of the plant, all that stuff, yes, but like your previous transgressions or lack thereof, eh, not so much in
Right.
my opinion. um the other thing that I thought was interesting what you're saying and is like you mentioned about like water and stuff. I don't know where this why I took it this way, but like RO,
Oh
right?
gosh. Yes.
Like, and I'm even looking at it now. Like, I just pulled a water sample on a facility to see if like we even want to put RO in, right? And back, in the days when I first started hanging out with folks growing in greenhouses and growing in hoop houses and growing in all these things, I can remember one guy saying to me, if the water is good enough to drink, it's good enough for the plants.
Mm,
And there's some nuance to that statement, but his plants looked fine, and
right.
his plants were growing well, and his produce was selling at, markets and things like that. Um, what are your thoughts on like, is it just kind of a wasteful tactic that we've adopted because of this? And again, I think that goes to the idea of like that individuality, right? And that individuality and that love for the fertigation side of things, where it's like the tweaking of the nutrients and the different recipes. And I'm going to buy from this one, I'm going to bring it in from that one, try these different recipes out, these different formulas, and wanting to start with a blank slate in the water department. But then, what are your thoughts on it? Like, is it necessary? Is it overkill?
I mean, I think the first thing is what you did, which is let's get a water quality sample and see what type of water we have to start with and whether or not we need to clean that water up of any potential contaminants, whether they be biological or mineral or whatever. And not just once, but you want to do it at least twice per year, preferably 4 times per year, because water quality does change based on the season. So you want to know that even if you're city water, right? I mean, your municipality might source water from a different place in the winter than in the summer. So that's really important is to get a water quality test. And I don't know if it's laziness or not knowing how to do it, or there's not a lab nearby who can, do a water quality sample. But not every grower is doing that. And the quick fix, right, is to just install $100,000 RO system that you may or may not need. I was kind of complaining about the individualism of traditional horticulture and how that's, hasn't been necessarily a benefit to the industry, at least some of the new people that have coming in. But then this idea of the community in cannabis can also be a detriment in the way that if you see that your neighbor or on Instagram, social media, other people are installing RO, that you might think you have to install RO in order to grow the same quality, to be able to take the same pictures of this of a beautiful, giant flower bud at the top of your plant, and that you think that RO somehow is the reason that they are so successful at growing. I mean, it could be one of the reasons that they're successful, but they also might have shit water. They might live near a landfill or something and be drawing well water. And it's like, oh, hell yeah, I want RO. Um, so, uh, community, right? It kind of like if one person does it, then other people are going to want to do it, and you might be lemmings headed towards a cliff that is financially unsustainable. And I think that's one of the things with traditional horticulture is that they might not have the same love and intimacy with their plants, but they are business people through and through. And so they are looking for ways to increase their bottom line, not by just producing more, but by reducing
Mm.
their expenses and the cost of production. Where cannabis growers, I still see they are still the primary target, I would say, for salespeople selling technology and equipment and methods that don't belong there, right? Tomato a salesperson for an RO system or for a HEPA filtration system is not knocking on the door of a tomato greenhouse grower. There's
Yeah.
no sell there.
Right. Yeah.
But they are pounding down the doors
Mhm.
of cannabis growers because cannabis growers don't necessarily know that there's nothing there. And that they're just going to be out of pocket for a technology that they don't need, that is expensive to upkeep, that's going to break down, right? That, like there's all kinds of costs that are associated with that. So, um, right, doing your due diligence ahead of time to figure out what do you need? Like, do you need an RO system? Do you need a HEPA filtration? Let me just tell you about HEPA filtration real quick. Is that HEPA filters are great for removing viruses and airborne bacteria. They do not, they do remove mold spores. Okay, that's fine. But so do your typical particle filters. MERV 11 filters remove mold spores. If you want to remove airborne viruses, it's really for people because there are no airborne viruses that infect plants. Okay, I want you guys to think about that. Yes, there are viruses, there are viroids, but they are all root-borne, waterborne, soil-borne, or transferred through touch. They are not transferred through the air. If you want to invest in HELPA, invest it in your office to prevent flu and cold and coronaviruses,
Interesting. That's super
not for
interesting.
your plants.
So I actually haven't seen a grow with HEPA in the grow rooms in a while, although,
Good.
I'm
They're
sure it's still
listening.
I'm sure it's still out there, and I would imagine a lot of these ones that are getting built to EU GMP specs, whatever it
Mm.
is, I bet a lot of those have it, would be my guess, right? They were probably convinced that that was part of it.
Yeah.
But with that, is it then like looking at just that analogy or that information, right? That really good information about the viroids are not coming through the air to attack your plants. They're root borne. Is it then, well, instead of spending the money on HEPA, we should be spending the money or looking at ways to sanitize the water being delivered to the roots. So
Absolutely.
like I've seen lately like I guess a hypochloric acid
Mm.
injection and things
Yep.
like that are starting to get a little bit more popular. And there's of course other methods that are being used to inject in the stream. But then that kind of actually even takes me back to the RO thing. It's like there's chlorine in the water and we're going to strip it out, or do we need to strip that out? I know like chloramine, I think binds with nitrate and creates something else that can be a problem. But so like, are there some things in your water that could be coming into your facility that you do want to get rid of, like chlorine and chloramines, but maybe the salts that are in that water to start, just that's fine. Just rebalance your FERT to accept that.
Yeah, I mean the thing with reverse osmosis, there's a couple things. One is yeah, if you have dirty well water, by all means do it. If you have a research facility, by all means use reverse osmosis so you can, control every element and the quality to the 100th of a percentage type of thing. Um, but when we use reverse osmosis, we are stripping out all of the natural elements from it, which means that you have to put all those elements back in, which is an added cost, right? Like if you did a water quality test and found out that, seven of your 10 macronutrients were met from your natural source of water, and now you strip it all out with RO, you have to put all of that back in, right? You don't recover it, right? Like you dump it down the drain. Um, there's an innovative technology idea. Like let's reclaim those minerals that we removed from RO. Anyway, but I digress. So um so that's one. The other thing is that you change the ionization and pH of the water, and so you can't just add nutrients back into the water because um and I'm not an irrigation water expert, but uh you have to adjust the pH in order for it to accept the ions that you're going to add in that fertilizer. And if you don't do that, they're going to stay out of solution. They're not going to actually get absorbed by the water. So you're not avoiding chemistry. You still have to chemically adjust the water, first the pH, and then add the chemicals in. All of those things are added costs where if you were already 70% of the way there with your natural water source, you just added a cost that you didn't need to. And and in terms of sterilizing the water, um, the only time you really want RO is if you have toxic chemicals,
Mhm.
cadmium or nickel, right? Things that are toxic to the plant. But if we're talking about algae or bacteria or viruses, then we again have particle filters for the water, followed up by ozonation, UV, sand filters, right? There are so many other means of cleaning the water without using reverse osmosis to reduce waste and reduce costs.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things you were talking about like quality, right? Like
Mhm.
there's so many levers, right? We've just talked about, I think we've just covered probably all the levers in this conversation,
At some
right?
point, yeah.
From temperature and relative humidity and all that to lighting and photons and delivery of those and where we're delivering those and CO2 and all the stuff. And there's so many levers and water quality and nutrients and nutrient quality. Um, what if you look at sort of the broad brush of CEA, what is the number one way, the best way, your best advice for improving unit economics? And is that driving quality? Is that driving yield? Is that driving both? And like what levers are you looking at typically to pull to accomplish that?
To improve unit economics, I would like to see more emphasis on cost reduction than on yield production. Uh, we talked a lot about more is more, but less is less. Less
Mm,
cost is less expense is also more, right? Less is more in a lot of cases. And I don't hear growers, investors, executives, managers, whatever, talk very often about wanting to reduce their costs. They want to reduce mold growth. They might want to reduce the labor associated with scouting or with removing contaminated product or whatever. But very rarely am I called in to optimize energy use or reduce water use or maximize nutrient delivery or optimize the three legs of the stool. It's usually how do we produce more more high quality weed
mm,
or more high quality whatever product. And so, we talked about under canopy lighting, and I get a little bit hot under the collar about it because to me, I just see it as an added cost that is producing more. But I want to talk about what the potential downsides of that is. And we all know that in cannabis in certain mature markets that we've had this race to the bottom. And the more we produce, the lower the floor gets. And quite honestly, what that means, if I'm talking to the cannabis community right now, is that the only winners are going to be the really big growers because they're going to be the ones that can scale enough to produce enough to make up for the low prices that they're getting for the product that's being sold. And so, the smaller, medium-sized growers who are also trying to produce more, and I mean, it is a race, right? Um, might actually be contributing to their own demise. And the competitive advantage that you are going to have is by finding ways, maybe instead of producing more with what you have, is to produce the same with less.
Mm,
And that's
yeah.
what I would like to see more emphasis in all of the horticulture industry, but primarily with cannabis because the greatest opportunity is there.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's great advice and very spot on. There's so much focus on quality, right? And quality, we had a little exchange, a little email exchange or whatever the other day about, a lot of people refer to product high quality flower as fire,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And
Thank you for educating. As soon
I
as you
was
said that, I was
I
like,
was
oh, okay, now I understand.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I was, we were joking. It's like, it's like, well, what does that mean? It's like, I don't know. It's hip with the kids, like it's
Yeah. I'm
back
Gen
in,
X all
yeah,
through
back,
and
so
through.
my,
Dank
yeah,
is
so
dank weed
my,
all the way. Yeah.
back in my day, it was, I think, it was dank, right? If we got a
Yeah.
bag of really good weed, it smelled good, it looked good. It was like, oh, is it dank? And we're, smoking it up, but it's like, fire product and that's taken hold as a terminology. What does it mean? It means good weed. It means quality, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like any other crop, right? You go buy tomatoes right now at the Safeway, and they don't taste like anything. They're red.
Right.
That's about it. They're red and round.
That's
They're all the
about
same
it. Yeah,
shape. That's about
exactly.
it. And then certain times of the year they're great. But
That's
with
called bag appeal, right?
yeah, bag appeal, right? Yeah, that's the bag appeal. But with cannabis, flower and I'm really, very heavily focused on like flower production and the because it's the core of everything, right? If you don't have good flower, I think, your concentrates, your other derivative products really, can't be great if you
Mm,
don't start with a good uh
yeah.
core product. So, what in your experience makes fire? What makes it great? Like how do we, to me it's always the nose. Like there are just certain
Oh,
terpenes, there are certain flavors that I get when I smell flower. For me it's always the nose, and then the appearance as well, for sure. But what is it that we're really chasing in terms of quality?
yeah. I mean, I have a lot of conversations with growers on my podcast and, in just conversation about THC percentage, right? And it's amazing how there's a consensus, I would say, amongst growers that THC is the wrong quality metric to be chasing, but is the primary quality metric that their marketing team and that retailers are requesting. And I mean, I've had conversations with growers since probably the very first podcast interview, practically, that I had a few years ago with a grower. And it's just like, why haven't we been able to educate our marketing teams and retailers and consumers that THC is not, shouldn't be the primary and is not the only um, metric by which we should measure the quality of cannabis. There are other cues as well, but I just, on that topic, right? I mean, I feel, 10 years ago when I was first getting into the cannabis industry, everyone talked about the entourage effect.
Yeah.
Do you hear that term
Yeah.
anymore?
Every now and again,
Rarely,
but rarely, right? Like,
right?
yeah, very rarely. And I think it's,
Everyone was like these terpenes and
yeah,
CBD and THC and THCV and like all the, it's like the holistic quality of the chemical makeup of the flower is what's going to give you the experience you're looking for, whether it's medicine or just a really good time, right?
yeah,
Where did that go? Why did we let marketers decide what was good quality product? My guess, if I'll answer my own question, if
yeah,
I can,
yeah, yeah,
is that there's a number we can put to it. When you can actually quantify a qualitative metric, that's fire, right?
yeah,
Like, when does that ever get to happen? So, my guess is that there's a number that we can assign to the quality, and that's why, one of the reasons why, anyway. Um, but hey, community, get together and let's figure out a way to change the narrative back to entourage effect and back to 20% THC as opposed to 35% THC. Because, if there are so many cultivars backslash strains out there that do so well in challenging climates, in hot climates, humid climates, drought conditions, right? Low water inputs, that perform so well, but only have a THC output of 20 or 22%. And when I talk to growers, they're like, God, we love this plant. It can tolerate anything. Like the sun doesn't come up for 5 days and it is still pumping
yeah,
along and still produces like the best quality
yeah,
weed ever. But our marketing team doesn't want it because it's not 30%. So we're like culling that strain. And it's just is like, that sucks, right?
yeah,
Like that is so disappointing. And also, just from a personal note, I have so many friends who are not users. And they tell me all the time, they're like, God, I wish there was like a 10%, THC
yeah,
cannabis flower that I could buy because I want to go to a party and I want to like puff on a joint, but I don't want to be blasted and like fall asleep in the corner. I want to like be social and be able to like still hang out and, but like this is too strong for me. And so it's like there's a market there, right? There's a narrative there. There is a production value there. Everything is there to deliver lower THC cannabis, but growers and people who are outside the marketing sphere, we are not doing a good job at pushing the value of those lower in quotes, everybody who's just
yeah,
listening, lower
yeah,
in quotes quality
yeah,
cannabis.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that the point about the conversation being around the entourage effect, the cannabinoid and terpenes and other and the other things that I don't really even fully understand. I'm fairly
yeah,
familiar with cannabis terpenes and what's in it in there and flavonoids and there's other things right going on in the plant that when they're all working together, right, that's where you see the maximum benefit of this plant. And I think that part of it is the shift away from medical, right? So
yeah,
for the early
yep,
stages, it was like every state was just a medical state, right? Every market was just a medical market. And, it shifted with adult use. And so, I've lived from day one by this idea that cannabis is medicine, regardless of what the state calls it. And
mm,
that's how I want to treat it. That's the culture piece that I want to live in.
yeah.
And I think you make a good point of like, can we pull this conversation back and away from this idea of like, nope, you only got to buy the 97 octane. Like that's all. eight
Right.
dollars a gallon, 97 octane. That's all your car runs on. It's like, no, actually, I could put something different in here and it's going to actually work maybe a little bit better. And um, so, one of the things I wanted to touch on and is that, where you and I first got to hang out. I think we'd worked on a project together prior to this, but where we first got to like hang out for a bit was in your class, in your training that you do. And so, one, do you still do them? Are they still available? Are you still putting those on? Two, I mean, that's where I first heard the term VPD.
Oh,
I'd never heard VPD, but that's where I first heard it and got to learn about psychometric charts and a lot of fun stuff around HVAC and enthalpy. I think was the first time I ever heard that terminology.
hmm.
And so that was really the start of, because at that point I was really, really wanting to learn every single thing that I could around the integration, like the biomechanical integration piece. And so it was an awesome class, remember it. I think it was like, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't know how long ago was it. That wasn't 10 years ago, but like maybe 8 years ago.
Maybe 18 or 19. I can't
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Okay. So it was a while ago. And yeah, are you still doing them? And, how do people find out about that? And how do they get involved in taking a class with you?
Well, thank you for asking that question. And the first thing I want to say is that I feel like I did my job if you are looking back at a course about HVAC and engineering and thinking it was fun.
Mhm.
That is my favorite feedback because HVAC is a pretty dry subject and complicated subject for a lot of people. And that is one of my goals is to make it fun and tangible and easy to access. And yes, it has been many years that I have been thumping on the concepts of vapor pressure deficit, enthalpy, the value of the psychrometric chart, what is latent versus sensible loads. And I see a lot of people now talking about VPD, which is wonderful. I'm so glad that that has infiltrated the industry and people are talking about it. Though, when I try to dive a little deeper, I realize that a lot of growers know that it's important, but they don't necessarily understand why or how to use it in their operation.
Mhm.
And so if any listeners out there want to learn more, I have blogs and podcasts on that topic, and please feel free to reach out to me. In terms of the workshops, the last one we did was 2 years ago in Sacramento. We're always thinking about doing more, doing it again in different locations. Um, so if you or any of the listeners have ideas on a location or a region, a market that would really benefit from the workshop, I would like to take it on the road and deliver that class to you know to have the maximum reach. I also do workshops one-on-one with companies and corporations who have a team that they want to learn together, be on the same page, and all have right the same fundamental understanding of climate management and control for their facility or facilities sometimes. So, yes, I don't have one scheduled right now for the next one. Sometimes I think about tagging it along with another conference. I've done that in the past, and that worked out really well. And I do them for individual companies. So, if you have any suggestions of where I should take it on the road to, or if any listeners do, I'm all ears.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it was a great experience for me, and I mean, it's one of those things that I'd probably take it again, especially now that I'm so far down the rabbit
Mm,
hole of these topics, right? And
yeah.
trying to really, in my day-to-day work, trying to really understand them and constantly developing, the spreadsheets to analyze, the grow rooms and the machinery and the equipment that I have available or am selecting and things like that. And it was invaluable. It was great. It was a
Thank
great
you. I have had
thing.
a few students who have attended multiple workshops, and then others who have sent other uh, growers or employees within the company, and go back and say, you have to take this, or we need to send more team members to this, to the next one. And one of my favorite things, and I don't know if you felt like this too, I think you went to the first one, the inaugural workshop, which was in our office. It has grown
Yeah.
since then. But one of my favorite things about our workshop is the variety of people within the industry that we get attending. So, one, we get growers from traditional horticulture and cannabis. So, there's a cross pollination of growers within, at the workshop who are trying to learn new skills and gain more knowledge. But also, we had, manufacturer representatives, vendors, investors, educators, and so you get this, there's this diversity of people that attend our workshop that I don't think you see necessarily at some of the academic short courses, which tend to be more concentrated with growers or future
Mhm.
growers
Yeah.
and students, where ours is really open to the entire industry. And so, we might have a cannabis grower sitting at the same table as a lettuce grower, sitting at the same table as a fan supplier,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all of the above. And so it's fun to see the interaction between all those different backgrounds at the workshop.
Yeah. That's really cool. That's awesome. Um, so you and I have talked now for a while.
Shocker.
We've blown over our allotted time, as I think we kind of
It's gonna be
expected might happen.
three
You know,
episodes.
I mean, we could go on. There's so many rabbit holes we could go down, that would be fun for you and I. But maybe we'll leave it here for now. And, I would really encourage if there's, anybody, listens to this, watches it, sees it on LinkedIn, wherever you catch this, your comments, your feedback, questions that you might have. I know, Nadia and I will both be keeping an eye out for that. I'd really love to know what questions people have about, this building these living, breathing machines, and how do we go about that, and how do we take the ones we have and make them better? How do we improve? And that's really, our goal, right, is to just continue to
Yeah.
improve on this CEA space and continue to help be part of, a little part of pushing it forward, which is so much fun, right? The last 15 plus years of my life have been spent doing it. And I know you've spent a long time, and it's a great thing to be part of. So I appreciate you taking all this time to talk to me, and always
It's
fun.
a pleasure as always. I feel like our conversations are never long enough, even when they're 2 hours long.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, thank you so much. And uh, before we go, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that? What's the info?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram. So you can look for my name, Nadia Sabeh on LinkedIn. And then my handle on Instagram is Dr. Greenhouse. You can also, if you want to email me, you can, Nadia at drgreenhouse.com. And then you can also find my website and submit an inquiry through our contact form there. I would also just recommend, if you want to take a deep dive into any of the topics that we've talked about, I think most of them I cover in some way through a blog or a podcast or an article or information on the website. I've really tried to make the website informative, as well as, um, I don't know, business interfacing, I guess. So Lots of ways to find me. I also, you'll see me at a lot of events. The next event I'm going to is Indoor AgCon. So if you're going to be there, I'd love to see you. We're actually hosting a networking event, a grower to grower networking event at the conference. Love to see you there. We're going to cover different topics to give you guys all an opportunity to meet each other and learn from each other.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me to have this conversation.
Great. Thanks, Nadia.
All right.